So I remember that guy because I had Kitty with me, and she was now accustomed to sitting on either shoulder. You know what I mean? She would sit on my shoulder. She would have a little pink collar on it, and I'd have a little pink leash, and she would just sit there. She would, she would just sit there quite happily, just over. And she loved people. She saw people, somebody coming to her, she put a little paw out, as if to shake hands and stuff. And I remember walking in to the dive center, and he says to me, "No animals allowed." And I just looked at him and I said, "Well, she's not an animal, And he goes, "Well, it's a cat, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." And I says, "Well, she's not an animal, And then I says, "I'm Colin. I'm here with Andy for the scuba gear." And then he kind of changed his tune a little bit, and he just says, "Well, as long as she doesn't piss on the floor." And I says, "No, she won't do that." You know what I mean? I says, "She's better trained than most people." And I says, "And doesn't have the attitude." And so I just kind of put him straight in his way, and I just wasn't going to be fucking interested in a verbal pissing competition with him. So I just says, "I do believe that you ordered 12 sets. I have them in the vehicle. Would you like me to bring him into the shop?" And he goes, "No, I'll have two of my guys go and look at everything to make sure that it's up to spec." And he says, "And we'll mark things off and we'll go from there." And he goes to me, "You can wait over there if you want," which was a seated area. And I says, "No." I says, "I'm not going to sit in a seated area." I said, "I'm going to go and I'm going to take the things out and make sure that everything's up to spec for you." I said, "I'll give your guys a hand." And so when I went outside, strangely enough, there was a Mexican guy from Cozumel called Miguel, and he was actually quite nice. And him and I got to habla a little bit of Espanol, un poquito Espanol, and we just started, have a little bit of chat in English. And I told him we weren't too far, long down in Cozumel, and he was just chatting away. And he asked me what dive shops down there, and I was telling him, and he was, "Oh yes, I know them guys." And he told me that he'd been in that this guy Mark had been to Mexico, been to Cozumel diving 4 or 5 years ago, and basically poached him and brought him back over. So his life changed a little bit. So I shook hands with the guy, and we checked everything off, and everything was there. And the other guy's name was Jed, and he was a local black guy from Bermuda. And Jed was telling me that he had been born there and raised there and had never been anywhere. He was telling me that the diving was fantastic. Asked me where I was living. I told him I was living in Miami, but that I had lived in Belize for a year or so, year and a half, diving down there in on a Burgers Key. And he just says that he'd heard about it, and he'd always wanted to go there. And I says, "You never know." I says, "Stay in touch." They never did. I would always give them a name and a phone number, but they never really stayed in touch. They were great coming out of the gate, but they kind of weren't much for stamina, so I always was courteous anyway. But Miguel said that he would definitely like to go down there at some point, and I said, "Yeah, no worries if he was serious enough." I said I could point him in the direction of some cheap accommodation and some friends and stuff like that. So, but yeah, took about an hour and a half to make sure that everything was there, because there were spare lines, there were spare octopus hoses, for the regulators. There were spare air gauges, depth gauges, O-rings. We had to account for everything. We had to account for silicone gel, we had to account for silicone spray. So we had to account for a lot of stuff, and it was all marked off, and it all had a serial number, and those serial numbers were taken, and of course all the paperwork was in triplicate. So yeah, it took a bit of time. Jed was very kind. He went and he got us some water and some Cokes. He got a little bowl of water for Kitty, and he'd actually brought down a little can of tuna fish, which was really kind of him. So very, very thoughtful guy, and it was very nice of him. So we did the business. We got everything sorted out, everything checked, and happy enough that everything was there. And Jed went up to into the dive center main office and gave the copy of the paperwork to Mark. I'll call him Mark anyway. And he didn't ask me to go up, but he sent $9,400 down with Jed for me, and I took the money off him, And I says, no thanks. So I give the guys $20 each out of my own pocket, out of my own money. I give them $20 each, and thanked them, shook hands, and then I walked back up to the office, and I just fucking didn't like the guy at all. And if that's the reason why Andy sent me there, I could fully understand. But he was British, and I could play him at their own game. So I walked in. I said, "You've got your copy, fine. You're happy with everything?" "Yes." I dropped him off some new catalogues and stuff, and he said, asked me how long we were on the island. I said we'll be on the island about 3 days, 4 days max. And then he just says to me, you know, could you come back in? He goes, the day before you go, he says, and I'll have another order for you. I says, no problem at all. That was it. He didn't shake hands. I didn't offer my hand to shake. It just wasn't worth it, to be honest. It was just very, very fucking arrogant. And Miguel and Jed were standing outside when I left, and he kind of raised his eyebrows at me, as if to say, what a fucking dick. And they came over and they stroked Kitty before they went. I bumped fists with these two guys. They were actually quite nice, quite helpful. Thanked them for the time. I told them I'd be coming back to pick up another order, and if they were there, I'd see them before I went, and they were nice enough. So Andy had gone to the little hotel in Platts Village. It wasn't hard to get around Bermuda. It was actually quite easy. It's quite British. All the streets were quite British, quite British named, and just got you where you needed to go. If you got lost, you just went down one street, came up another, and just came back on yourself, and you were back on the main roads again, and it was as simple as that. So the breeze was stunning. It was fucking hot as hell for September, but the breeze was lovely, and I was just so reminded me of San Pedro, and I just so missed being down there again. And I was actually hoping I might get a dive in Bermuda before I went, but it wasn't to be. So actually the Blue Island divers, Blue Water divers, as they were called, was actually the place where Gary had told me to go, but I just totally forgot all about it, with the guy being so arrogant, and I just didn't bother, to be honest. And the way that he was, I don't know if it had been bothered to say anything about Gary anyway, so I never mentioned it, and that was that. So made my way back to the little bed and breakfast. I don't know if it was the Seashell or something like that. It wasn't far off the beach, on the west side of the island. It was where Platts. It was just absolutely beautiful place. I got back there, and Andy was not in the room. He got us a room each, because they're only little single rooms. So I knocked on his door and found that he was just sitting outside at the bar area, just drinking a Coke, and he was eating, I think, was it quesadilla or something like that anyway, and he was just as happy as a pig in shit. And Andy had met somebody that he knew, and it was a woman, Laura, her name was, and Andy had flown down there with Tom. It was one of his and Tom's regular places to go to, and Laura had remembered Tom, and she had asked about him, and you know, Andy had passed on that Tom had just recently passed away from head trauma, and she was devastated. So I walked in. I just gave Andy a thumbs up. I didn't talk money, didn't hand him anything while she was sitting there. Andy introduced me as Colin, as his friend and his co-worker. Colin's from the UK, but he was living down in Belize, and he came up to live with me and work with me in Miami. Very nice woman. I think Laura back then was probably 50s, late 50s. Absolutely lovely looking American woman. She had a New York accent, and I think she was one of those really cutesy Jewish princesses, really moneyed, very dark hair, all plastic, you know, big titties, and just a lovely person. Big giant red long fingernails that look like something like Tommy, that Freddy Krueger would probably scratch your eyeballs out with. But she was absolutely lovely, and she was fascinated by Kitty. As soon as she seen, oh my goodness, can I hold her? I just passed her over, and Kitty just settled on those big old titties. And she's just purring away. So I was like, lucky you. I wish that was me. So so she was playing she was just sitting there holding Kitty in, and Kitty was well at home. So me and Andy were just talking, and Laura was actually living on the island now. Andy met her down there a year or so ago, and she was down on holiday, staying at the same place, and she just decided that she was just going to move down there and live.